Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Bennett Tchaikovsky, and this is my video 10. By the way, I apologize for the last video. That was should have been part 9. So what are you going to do? And anyways, we're going to be talking about determining product costs and then preparing a multi-step income statement, building on the question that we were just going over in part 9 of that last video. So my disclaimer and copyright notice, the information and opinions in this presentation are those of myself and not my employers or affiliated organizations, including but not limited to Irvine Valley College and the South Orange County Community College District. The presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute any legal or accounting advice whatsoever. This presentation is copyright 2008 to 2023 by Bennett Tchaikovsky. All rights are reserved. Any distribution is strictly prohibited. So given if we have, so let's just kind of go ahead and take a look at our problem that we're going to be going through and solving today. So given production at 5,000 units, determine the per unit cost at this level, as well as 4,800 and then 5,200 units. And let's go ahead and just go right to our question. So what this question was asking us to go through and do, and please see part 9 of the video, which I will link below so you can go check this out. Is that we were asked to go through and basically do the per unit for the variable costs and basically identify all costs as variable or fixed, identify all costs as product or period. So assuming that each bike sells for $2,500, determine the cost per unit sold for one bike. Let me make sure I got this right. Yes, actually, no, it should be for 3,500. Sorry. Determine the cost of per unit sold for one bike when 5,000 bikes are sold. Okay, so there are a few different ways we can go through and tackle this, right? So, but let's just go through and do the easiest way for the base amount. Over here for the battery, the metal frame, the direct labor, the bike components, the factory machinery depreciation straight line, the rent on the factory building, and then lastly, we have the factory supervisor's salary. These are all product costs, right? These are all of my product costs. When I'm being asked to determine the cost per unit sold for one bike, I'm going to only be using the product cost. Remember, we're trying to ultimately determine what our cost of goods sold is going to be. So we're only going to be using our product cost. Now, in terms of going through and doing this, we already know, because this is going to be at 5,000 units. Right, so I already know that this is going to be at 5,000 units, right? And this is really applicable for the variable costs, right? Because they vary with production. My per unit here is at 8,300. My per unit over here would be 4.5 million divided by 5,000. This is going to be 625,000 divided by 5,000, or 125. So over here, got 900 and we got 125. So the total cost of my variable cost in terms of producing at 5,000 units is I take the number of units I'm producing times the per unit and I get to the total. Now you might be looking at me like, Bennett, is there something wrong with you? Because we already know what the totals are over here. But the reason why I'm going through and doing it this particular way is because when we're asked to go through and to basically to do this at different production levels, then that is going to be changing my answer. So over here, my factory machinery straight line, because this is fixed, this over here is going to be 480,000. My rent on factory building, it's a fixed cost. It's going to be 144. The factory supervisor salary is going to be at 120,000, right? So these costs here, those fixed costs, they're going to be the same at any production level, right? So they're fixed. They do not change. So over here, my total cost, my total production costs are going to be 7,769,000. Yep. So now it's asking me though for the per unit. So what is it going to cost per unit? Well, over here, 7,769,769 at 5,000 units. So my per unit is going to be over here, basically 1,553.80 per unit. Okay, so that's how I go through and do this first particular question, right? I'm asked to go over here and say that assume that each bike sells for 3,500, determine the cost per unit sold for one bike when 5,000 bikes are sold. My cost per unit is only going to be the product cost, right? But I'm asked for a per unit. These costs here are for 5,000 units. So to get to my total costs for 5,000 units, I have that here. I have total units, which is going to be 5,000. This is going to be giving me my per unit cost at 1,553.80 per unit. So let's go to the next one over here. Okay, so assuming that 5,200 bikes are sold, what will the cost per unit be? Okay, so now we're going to come over here and we're going to change up this example a little bit, right? So what's happening? Well, we still have the battery, the metal frame, the direct labor, the bike components, the rent on the factory building, the factory supervisor's salary, right? So when I look at this, and if I'm doing this over here for 5,200 units, let's look at the first thing. I want to focus on the fixed cost. Now, the factory equipment depreciation straight line, is that going to change? No, it's fixed. This is not going to change. The rent on the factory building, not going to change, 144. The factory supervisor's salary, 120,000, is not going to change. Why not? Because these are fixed costs, right? They're fixed costs. They do not change as we're going through and making more or less units. They're fixed, so that's all we're going to go through and do. Now, but what costs will change? Well, over here, I'm no longer producing 5,000 units. I'm producing 5,200 units, right? Because these are variable costs, so they're going to vary with production. So you got to go back to the last, well, Bennett, why were you setting this up this way? Because I needed the per unit costs to go through over here because they're variable costs, right? So as I look at this, the per unit becomes very, very important for me. So over here, I've got my per unit cost. So my total costs at 5,200 units. And if I add these through, I get a total cost of production. This will be 8,050,000. Total units are 5,200. My cost per unit is going to be 1,548 per unit, or this is going to be less on a per unit basis. So this is my per unit. Now, you might be asking yourself the question, which is a great question to ask, is that why is this lower than this part over here? Well, let's take a look at it. In terms of the variable costs, right? If I was just to look at the variable costs, right? And I divided this over here by 5,000. And if I just looked at the variable costs over here, and I divided this by 5,200, the cost per unit or the variable costs are exactly the same, right? Because they're variable, right? If I have one, on a per unit basis, they are exactly the same. Here I made 5,200 units. My variable cost for the 5,200 units was 7.3 million. Here I made 5,000 units. My variable costs were 7,025,000 or 1,405 per unit. The reason why the costs are dropping is because these fixed costs, right? The fixed costs over here of 480, 144, and 120 are being spread out amongst 5,000 units. When I look at this over here, the 480, because they're fixed, 144 and 120 at 5,200 units, these are now being spread out against more units. So my cost per unit for the fixed cost is dropping. So when you see this kind of thing, if my production level goes up in general, right, because some of the times the cost can get more expensive, but I should be more efficient. And so therefore, this is what we call economies of scale, right? So as I produce more, I should have more cost savings because these fixed costs are being spread out amongst more units. So that is what is causing the price to go through and drop. So when I ask this question, are the costs going to be higher or lower compared to when 5,000 bikes are sold? The costs are going to be lower because the fixed costs of production are being spread out amongst more units. Very important concept to understand, especially for this particular chapter. So let's go through over here. And now let's do the 4,800 units. So now what we're going to be doing, we're now going to do this for 4,800 units, right? So when we go through and do this for 4,800 units, and remember, if you're taking me in one of my classes, right, you're not going to have to write out this level of detail on the exam, right? Why do I write out so much detail in these videos? Is because I want you to understand where the numbers are going through and coming from. Very important. Okay, so let's take the same philosophy. We're going to basically keep our fixed costs fixed. Those are not changing, right? So they're fixed costs, they'll stay the same. Over here, I'm making 4,800 units of each one. My per unit, 80, 300, 900, and 125. So over here, my total. So my total over here, my total costs for 4,800 units. And I'm expecting this to be lower, right, than where I was at 5,000 because I'm producing fewer variable costs, is to me it's 7,488,000. My total units, though, are going to be at 4,800. So my per unit cost, right, is higher, right, basically over here than what it was at 5,000 units. So it's higher than the 5,200, higher than the 5,000. Why is it higher? Well, my variable costs on a per unit basis right up here, this has not changed between this and our other examples. It's still this 1,405. But what's happening over here is that our fixed costs are now being spread out amongst fewer units. So over here, this is now at 155 per unit as opposed to 143. Why is that? It's because the fixed costs are fixed. They don't change. But my issue is, so the fixed costs are not changing. However, even though the fixed costs are not changing, they're being spread out amongst fewer units. So when I'm producing less, my cost per unit is going to go up. So right over here, this is what you would basically, so we've just kind of gone through those two parts. So prepare a multi-step income statement, assuming we sell 5,200 bikes in 2024. So for this part over here, what I'm going to go through and do is, what is a multi-step income statement? If I come over here and look over at sec.gov, and we'll go to our friends at, we'll just do the Home Depot again. So over here, even though they're a retailer, their financial statements kind of look like a manufacturer. So over here, we have What is a multi-step income statement? A multi-step income statement is I'm taking my sales minus my cost of goods sold. That is giving me gross profit. It's telling me how much I'm making off of my inventory. And then my SG&A, which is like how much can I cover of my SG&A costs. This is a very, very important way of going through and showing information. Because when we look at a company like Rivian, right, and we look at Rivian's income statement, they have a gross loss. They're losing money selling cars, right? They lost $535 million in the 3 months ended March 31st, 2023. They're burning through cash. You look over here, R&D, SG&A, they're burning through money very, very quickly. So they make beautiful cars, but we'll see what happens. Okay. So I come over here, and if I'm going to sell the bikes for $3,500 each. So my income statement, so we've got over here, ZI, income statement, we'll say projected for the year ended 12/31/24. We always want to say projected. This is not a real number, but I want to basically say, what's happening here. So my sales. So I have over here, my units being sold are 5,200. My sales price per unit is going to be 3,500. So my total sales dollars is going to be 18.2 million, less my cost of goods sold. Over here, 5,200, basically, let's call this per unit. Okay, so over here, my cost of goods sold at 5,200 units. We determined that value right over here to be 1,548 per unit. If you get the numbers off, it's more than likely because I'm having different decimal points. So if you're close to, if you're a little bit off on your numbers, don't worry about it. So my cost of goods sold is right over here at 8,050,000. This is going to give me my gross profit, right? So I subtract this through, get my gross profit. This is something you should have learned in financial accounting. If you didn't, it's okay. I have other videos on how to do these statements. Okay, going below here, less selling, general, and administrative. So what are the SG&A costs? It's all of our period costs, right? So over here, the rent on the office building, the office manager's salary, right? Over here, the office equipment rent, the sales commissions, and the advertising. Okay, so the rent on the office building was $50,000. The office manager's salary was over here at $100,000. The office equipment rent was at $18,000. Now, for my sales commissions, how many units did I sold? Well, I sold 5,200 units. How much what's my commission rate per unit? It's 100. So over here, my total amount of my sales commissions is going to be 520,000. Remember, this is 100 per bike sold. I sold 5,200 bikes. That's how I'm getting the number. The advertising is a total of 600,000. So my total SG&A is going to be the 50 plus the 100 plus the 18 plus the 520 plus the 600. So my operating income or my net income is going to be right over here at 8,862,000. So this is how we go through, and I go through and do this part of it. If you're taking my managerial accounting class, right, you will see a question extremely similar to this on your exam, right? What will I do? I'm going to give you information, right? I'm going to ask you either to classify it, or you may not have to classify it as product or period, but I'm going to ask you, well, what is the cost per unit at these different production levels? So you'll have to know how to go through, variable versus fixed, product versus period. Then I'm going to ask you to go through and prepare an income statement, multi-step, right? Going sales minus cost of goods sold is gross profit less SG&A. So that's what you're going to basically go through, see on an exam if you're taking my managerial accounting class. So in any event, I thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on future videos. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out. And I thank you for liking and subscribing to the channel. I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a great day.